Hello everybody, this week we are taking a brief break from our ARPG series to take a look at the new beta, the open beta for GameMaker Studio 2.3. This version of GameMaker has been in closed beta for a little while, and it's coming with a whole host of really cool GML changes that I've talked about on my channel before, that Yo-Yo Games announced quite a long time ago, and that we've been looking forward to for a very long time. Now, the information about the beta is all up on Yo-Yo Games' website. You can see all the information about it there, and you can get hold of it yourself if you want to try this stuff out. They do recommend, and I recommend with them, that you don't use this beta for any in production projects that you've got on the go. This is more for testing out new functionality and trying out some of these new cool things that are really going to quite radically change the new best practices for doing almost everything in GML. There's a lot of new paradigms and new structures and new ways of doing things in code that are going to be possible as a result of the changes coming to this version. I will do some more videos in the future talking about the big GML changes and big structural changes coming to GameMaker and some of the cool, exciting new features. But today I want to focus on some of the IDE changes that are coming and some of the big changes that will impact your workflow right away. Some of the things that have necessarily had to change about the way you do things in GameMaker that you're going to need to be aware of, especially if you're following some of my older tutorials and so on. First of all, though, let's just take a look at the new IDE itself, and I want to start off by taking a look at this asset browser. What's an asset browser, you might ask? I thought that what you're looking at there is called the resource tree. And you'd be forgiven because they've renamed the resource tree to the asset browser in version 2.3. So this name makes a lot more sense for how this now works. It works, it's a bit more in tandem with how lots of other modern tools like how Unity and so on works, in that you still have all of these folders for your different resource types, but they're now just folders. You can contain any type of resource in any folder. So I could take this script I've got here and stick it in with my rooms if I wanted to, right? It's just a folder, and they're named and arranged the same way they always were by default. So you'll have room, sprites, scripts, and so on and so forth. But that's to help with your old workflow, so it kind of matches what you're used to. But you can rename these folders anything you like. I could rename sprites to my cool folder, and I could even change the color of that folder, and it'll color everything inside it. I can recolor rooms to red, that's pretty cool. And as I said, these folders no longer have to contain their original resource type, so you can organize things now in your asset browser however you would like. So as you can see, it has all of your default folders in there that you would expect, but we can go ahead and delete ones we don't need. So the main instant improvement you'll see to your workflow right away in pretty much any project is you can go ahead and find this timelines folder and just delete it. Because, I'm sorry timelines, but you know how it be. So one thing to be aware of here is now, especially if you're following older tutorials, there's a slight extra step involved when it comes to creating a resource in the way many of us will be very familiar with. So if I right click in sprites, I no longer have a create sprite button, because obviously each folder doesn't have kind of its own context anymore, even though we've got these default folders. Any folder can contain any resource type, so now we have to go to create and select specifically the type of resource we want to create. Now they have added another way for you to quickly create new assets as well. You can click this little plus button up here, create asset, pick a specific type of asset, go to objects, we'll hit create, and it'll create it in whatever folder you have highlighted. Now this is something I couldn't get what I'm about to explain to work when it came time to recording this video, so I don't know if it's something I just don't understand, or if I understood it incorrectly, or if it's a bug or what. But when I was playing with the beta before writing the script for this video, I noticed that if I had the default folder structure and I used that plus button to make an asset, or if I pressed the keyboard shortcut like Alt S to make a sprite, as you can see, that's making some new sprites down there. If I had the default folder structure, it would actually put those sprites directly into the sprites folder for me automatically. I couldn't get this to work all of a sudden. As you can see, it's just putting them down here. But before that did work, so I don't know if that's going to be a thing or not, or if there's an option I'm missing or that I've turned off or something. I don't know. But that was a cool feature I was going to show off that helps maintain your current workflow. I don't know why it's not working right now, or if it will work when it comes about. But otherwise, it's worth being aware of now that you, generally speaking, especially if you've renamed these folders and so on, you're going to have to, you're going to be forced to organize your assets into the correct folders now, as opposed to just having them automatically all be wherever that type of resource belongs. There are two big new types of resources in here as well, called sequences and animation curves, and we're going to go into them in later videos, possibly closer to the actual release of this thing, once we've sort of, learned a lot more about how these work and what can be done with them. If you want to read more about sequences and animation curves, what they even are and what you can do with them at the moment, I suggest just hitting up YogaGame's website and that blog post. It'll be in the description, and there's some good information about that stuff there. It's quite exciting. One other thing to be aware of now is the way room order works has changed in order to fit in more with how the asset browser is now designed. Okay, so instead of just reordering your rooms right there in the resource tree in order to determine what goes first, you'll notice init has a little home symbol next to it, which indicates that that's the initial room. Okay, and we can change that room order just by going to this little hamburger menu and going to room manager. You'll see we get room order here, and we can reorder things in there, and that changes which one has the home and what order rooms are going to go to in terms of your room go to next commands and that kind of thing. On this tab we've also got room inheritance, and that will show you any inheritance structures from your rooms and so on, mostly to accommodate the fact that this folder can have any other type of resource in it now, and it's harder to display that kind of thing easily just in the asset browser. There's now also a whole bunch of different ways to search through your assets, particularly handy with larger projects when stuff starts to get quite beefy and you've got lots of different things to search through. We've got this little search bar at the top here, and I can just type in, say, player, and we'll get back every asset that has player in its name. Pretty helpful. Pretty similar to the Control-T functionality that still exists, where you can bring up kind of a little search bar and type in things in order to directly sort of open these things in a workspace. But now you can do that with your asset browser as well, which is pretty cool. Not only that, but you can apply a filter as well, and so you could say, I only want to see objects, and you can combine that with your search as well, and I only want to see objects with player in them, which gets us all the way down to our one player object here. So filters combined with the search can be pretty handy for finding stuff as well. The other new thing you've got in here that's helpful for searching, and a few other organizational things as well, is tags. Alright, so now you can apply tags to any resources you want and then search by tag. So I could go through, say, our entity objects here. If I go to edit tags and just write entity, and then we'll copy and paste that as well, and press enter just to make it a tag. We could also just make it, I don't know, a player tag or whatever else we want to apply to it as well. I could do the same for Quest NPC and signpost. Oh, let's make sure I actually added that one to there. No, I didn't. Okay, make sure you press enter. That definitely helps. Okay, so we've got those three tags with entity. If I go to tags now, you can see I've got tag entity and tag player. If I double click on one of these tags, it will then add it to our filters, as you can see. So if I just go back again and I double click on entity, it filters us down to our objects. And if I double click on player, or I click on player in the filters, it'll filter down to our players. If I click on both, it'll look for either of those tags. The other exciting thing about tags is that they're not just useful for organizing things. You can actually use them in code, so you can find live at runtime which assets have certain tags, or which tags are attached to which assets. There's a whole host of new GML functions specifically for getting the assets associated with a tag, or getting the tags associated with an asset, as well as adding and removing tags at runtime. Potentially very, very cool. I believe the example they gave in the blog post was talking about if something had, if you had a specific entity type that was like dies on touch, you could flag all of those particular assets with a specific tag, check that tag at runtime, and apply that functionality, which is quite an exciting idea as well. That's amazingly not all you can do with the asset browser. We've got a recent list that will show you recently accessed resources. You've got favorites, you can mark things as favorites, saved searches, you can save particular searches so you can come back to them more quickly. You've got quick access to your game options in here as well. That didn't used to be a thing, so I can quickly bring up like the Windows game options and change things in there. Overall, there's just a whole lot more organizational tools, almost too many if you ask me. New organizational tools and new ways to manage projects, which is going to be very, very useful for people making larger, more long-term, more complex, more structurally intensive projects. And if you ask me, a lot of the changes in 2.3 are geared towards making those kind of projects, long-term, big, heavy projects, more manageable. Which, if you remember from the video I did a while ago about GameMaker and whether or not it's like the best tool for your project, is honestly one of the areas where it struggles the most. Like really big, heavy, long-term projects, like it sometimes struggles to scale. And a lot of the changes here they're making seem to be aimed towards addressing that. But anyway, we'll come more to that in a bit. Right now, it's time to look at scripts. There's a big change going on here. Scripts. Now, when you make a new script resource, you'll see immediately it looks a little bit different. You can see script assets have changed for version 2.3.0. See this article for more information. Basically, you may have noticed in my recent videos I've been referring to scripts as functions, because currently in 2.2 that's what they are, and it's what they always have been. When you make a new script, you're making a global function that can be called anywhere in your game. Now, from 2.3 onwards, scripts and functions are separate things. A script can contain functions, but functions can be declared anywhere in GML, okay? Not just in a script. A single script no longer equals a single function. In fact, it can equal several functions, okay? You'll notice by default when I make this new script, this script 13 here, it has made a new function called script 13. This is what allows you to use scripts as functions in the way that you are used to, okay? So from now on, if you want to follow like an old tutorial or something like that and they ask you to make a script, you'll make a script and you'll type all that code within this function, okay? If you are following older tutorials or you do want to use the new scripts in this way, one thing you'll want to do is name the script right away. So you can see we've got the script 13 and a default function called script 13. If we rename this script to my cool function, you'll notice it renames the function in here as well. This only works while you've only got one function in here, and it can be a little temperamental as well. Sometimes once you've added a bit of code in here, it no longer seems to rename it along with renaming the script, so you have to be a bit careful. Other than that, if it does stop doing that, you'll just have to remember if you want to rename it in here as well. That's if you're following older tutorials, of course. If you are, just coding, I highly recommend making use of the new functionality here and declaring your functions. My other cool function in here, just and using scripts as what they are now, which is simply a collection of code and collection of functions. Any functions you declare in here are global scope, and you can just call them by typing my other cool function just anywhere in your game, just as you would otherwise. The other thing to note here as well is you can declare arguments in here, so like arg1, arg2, and give them specific names, which is quite helpful, because before, and then, work with those names inside the function, as opposed to, just having to work with the argument 0, argument 1, and so on. Although if you don't name any arguments in here, and you pass through arguments when you call the function, these will still work. So following older tutorials and just declaring functions and arguments in the old style should still work pretty much the same. You have gone to quite a lot of lengths to make sure that older stuff still works. How long it will work for is unknown. So it is a very good idea to start moving on to new paradigms and the new way of doing things as soon as you can. I, for one, am going to have my work cut out for me making new tutorial videos to cover beginner stuff again and re-show how to do some of this stuff in more optimal ways. But that is just the life of a tutorial content creator. For now, if you understood nothing else from this, the one thing to really get your head around is the fact that scripts are in 2.3 are no longer functions, they simply contain functions. Alright? And it's worth pointing out, just as a last thing, because I don't think I've really made it super clear, is that you don't have to declare functions inside scripts either. You could declare these in the create event of an object, for example, and where you declare them also sort of determines, I think, the scope of that function and where it can be called from later on, which can be very, very helpful for having a bit more structural control of your project rather than making every function you create just completely global in scope and everything having access to it. There is a ton more cool stuff that this stuff links into, method variables, structs, and other really awesome, exciting things, but those are going to have to wait for another video. But this systemic change is the big thing to be aware of when it comes to like following older tutorials from within 2.3 or anything, or just, you know, trying to stick to your old workflow while pushing forward with the new version. Quickly go over a couple of the other more obvious changes to the IDE. There's a whole bunch of stuff, but really quickly just going to take a quick look at the changes to the Sprite and Room editor. In the Sprite editor, you can see it looks a bit different, and how you place the origin now, as you can see this little crosshair on the Sprite here. You can just, you know, you see the icon changes as you mouse over it. You can just sort of drag it around now. And the main difference with this thing compared to the sort of crosshair that there was before is you'll notice this now sits in the top left corner of a pixel rather than highlighting a specific pixel of the sprite. That's actually more accurate to how an origin works. Okay, an origin doesn't actually represent a specific pixel on the sprite, as has how I honestly used to understand it and how I've probably explained it in prior videos, but it actually represents the top left corner of a pixel. It might be difficult to wrap your head entirely around that, but once you do, it's very helpful for then understanding where the exact center of your sprite is based on its origin. The Room editor has got a couple new pretty cool quality of life changes, mostly inspired from Photoshop. As you can see, we've got these kind of rulers kind of going around the outside of the Room editor now. And if I just sort of click and drag on them, I can drag out these Photoshop style guides to pretty much anywhere I want. If I drag the player around, you'll notice we've got these kind of smart guides coming up, these like lines that allow us to sort of very quickly and easily align our player with like maybe some of these guides that we placed in the room, or maybe other objects in the room, and so on, which is actually is very, very cool. Aligning and organizing stuff in the Room editor can be kind of a pain, especially if you're just working with the grid, but being able to drag stuff off and around the grid and snap it to specific positions based on centers and edges of different objects is very, very cool. So that's the IDE and the changes to it, or at least some of the most obvious ones and some of the ones you're going to have to wrestle with right away. I know we haven't gone into a lot of the GML stuff yet, and there's a lot to go into there, but that's going to have to wait for another time. Yo-Yo have definitely, with this version, committed quite hard to making sure that your old way of doing things is not too interrupted and not breaking apart old workflows with all these new systems and paradigms you're suddenly forced to learn. Which is very helpful for people like me who make tutorial videos. Some of their solutions to this feel a little bit temperamental. I don't know if that's just because it's the beta, but even just like the philosophy behind some of them feel a little bit like, how long can they really keep something like that there for? It feels a bit sort of held together with paper clips, the way they've got old paradigms working. Things like the script boilerplate that creates like a new function automatically for you. Things like the way the asset browser worked. I know I couldn't get that thing working earlier, but like making a new asset and it automatically going into sprites and so on. So one thing I would say is that even though what's very cool about this is if you go into 2.3 knowing how to use GameMaker, you still know how to use GameMaker, and your old way of doing things will still work vastly across the board. But I would say I do recommend trying to get on board with new ways of doing things as quickly as possible. And this will become more relevant in when we start talking about some of the GML changes. But starting to learn to use the new asset browser and organize things yourself. Learning to make multiple functions within scripts, or declaring functions within objects and not using scripts as individual functions anymore. Things like that I would definitely encourage you to start doing, because it is those methods that are going to be supported and improved upon and better going forwards, right? The other main thought I have about this is something I kind of talked a little bit about earlier, and that's that this version, this update 2.3, it feels like it's heavily geared towards improving GameMaker's ability to cope with larger projects. Everything seems aimed at that. All these changes to the asset browser, all these huge new organizational tools, the vast majority, when we get into it, of these GML changes, and we've talked about this a bunch in the past. If there's a video I did where I talked with Lazy Eye, and we discussed a lot of these sort of changes when they were announced a long time ago. And generally speaking, most of them feel like they are giving you more power to create systems in GameMaker that will scale, allowing you to more feasibly make bigger and more complex games. Not something that's ever been impossible, but something where GameMaker starts to show not its limitations, but just some of its weaknesses. It seems to me that with 2.3, they are really aiming quite hard at sealing those weaknesses and making GameMaker Studio 2 a more well-rounded, more professionally aimed and geared tool. And that's GameMaker 2.3. As I said, I'm going to have my work cut out for me when this stuff actually hits. I'm basically going to have to redo all of my beginner content, which was long overdue anyway, but is definitely something that will need doing again when this stuff really hits, because there's going to be so many new, better ways of doing things, even though some of the old ways will work. There's going to be so many cool new systems, new paradigms, and also just, because of so many changes to the UI and so on, it only makes sense to make some new videos. So you've got a whole lot of new beginner content to look forward to when this stuff finally hits public release. But for now, if you do have some spare time, I would recommend getting hold of this beta. It is an open beta now. You can just go and grab it and playing around with some of these new features and seeing what you think, and trying to get used to some of these new tools and things that you have in the IDE. It's well worth having a look. Do you have any thoughts about GameMaker Studio 2.3? You can leave them in the thing down below. You know how YouTube works. I don't need to tell you all this stuff. Thank you all very much for watching 2.3. Exciting stuff. Cheers, guys. Catch you all next time. Thank you, as always, to my awesome Patreon supporters who allow me to make this really cool work. Thank you in particular, and in no particular order, to the following: Bowser the Dog, Zenan May, Robert Churches, Rovan Darlin, Zephyr Flame, Daka Dondigo, Max M, Bertie T, Relentless Rex, Do What Doobie, Jason, James Siggins, Dark Rider 0318, James L. Anderson, Hare, Hyungjin, Rupinder, Rene Dam, Scott Matthews, Leo, Pixel Mush, Tyler Hubble, Maria Celesta Oliveira Frailing, Arrow Barbarian, Cabbage Pants, Phil Vertinen, Gilberto Cisneros, Figgy, Mark Burgess, John Harwood, Zach Collett, Goose, Caleb Franklin, Troy Mera, Alex Schenkel, Wilfredo Landera, Carter Green, Justin Adega, Julian Paul, and Kaiser Ho. Thank you all so much, and thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I'll catch you all next time.